All right, guys, back on Southeastern 16 with Max Barr previewing the top 7 showdown on
Whew.
Wednesday. Big matchup in SEC basketball. Number 1 seed potentially in play here, obviously, with both of these teams. Florida heads to Alabama, 6 p.m. Central start on ESPN2. Max, I feel like anytime these two teams play, it's always very entertaining. And I go back to last year's games between them, and I feel like we got that. You remember the game in Tuscaloosa last year, which was just a wild game, where I think
Wild.
Alabama won that one. It was 98-93 in overtime. And then they had a rematch a couple weeks later. It was Florida winning that one, 105-87 in Gainesville. Played again in the SEC tournament. Florida won that one, 102-88. So lots of points being scored between these two teams, which, what do you know, not a big surprise, given that these are two of the top 4 offensive teams in the country. Number 3 is Alabama, number 4 is Florida, and now they meet here, like I said, with 1 seed potential, I think, for sure on the line. Big game here for both teams, and, even though Florida had a loss last week at Georgia, even though Alabama had the loss at Tennessee, you still feel pretty good about the way these two teams are playing right now.
Yeah, this is game of the midweek for yours truly. Can't wait for this one. If you are going to ask me what the spread is going to be as we record this before one is released, pick them 50-50.
Yeah.
Maybe you get a point and a half in one direction. That's still what it's 50-50 toss up here. When you look at the matchup here, this is going to be a tricky one for Alabama, and it's going to be the same thing for Auburn this week. You're in that little in-between trap spot right before the season finale, Alabama-Auburn rematch. You've got Alabama coming off of the Tennessee road game, coming home for Florida, right in between going back to Auburn, sandwiched right in the middle there. Tricky spot here for Alabama. Didn't even dive into the matchup at all, Blake. Just right off the top, I think this is a tricky little trap. It's not a trap because Florida is incredible, but just sandwiched in between Tennessee and Auburn, not ideal there for the Tide.
Yeah, and again, the way the game ended against Tennessee, that's a pretty deflating finish because, like we talked about, it was the win probability for Alabama was like 88% or something like that. I think you had mentioned on Saturday at one point towards the end of that game. And then, of course, we know how they lost that one. And I think, again, this kind of comes down to we do go back to those games last year. And, I think it's interesting because, you look at the way that Alabama tried to defend Florida last year, and yet the Gators were still able to put up a lot of points, as we mentioned. I mean, they put up 93 in the overtime loss. They put up 105 in Gainesville, then put up 102 in the SEC tournament. Now, obviously, Alabama is a better defensive team this year. We can't kid ourselves, folks. I know people will still point out some things about Alabama defensively, but they're still better this year than they were last year. There's no question about it. And so, I think to me, that's what it comes down to, as we talked about it. I mean, this Florida team is finally all there. And now that you have all these guys at your disposal, I think still, if there's going to be something that holds us back on Alabama from, let's say they don't make the Final Four, let's say they get put out, before that, whatever. It may be some of those where, hey, they're playing a good offensive game, but they go out and just happen to play a team like Missouri or Auburn that's just going to come out and just outscore them. Well, we know Florida can do that too. And so I think defensively, I'm very curious to see what that looks like for Alabama right from the start here, because Florida is the kind of team that can come out early and just throw a haymaker and, just all of a sudden be up 10 points when you snap your fingers, because that's how good they are now that they have everybody else back. And so, like you said, matchup-wise, I think that's where this game gets interesting, especially when it comes to, who's guarding who and how Alabama tries to defend this Florida team.
Blake, when you look at the KenPom Player of the Year race, KenPom does a top 10. Right now, number 6 overall is Mark Sears. Number 7 overall is Walter Clayton. You've got a matchup of the same position that is top. If you want to talk about point guards, maybe Braden Smith for Purdue or Cam Jones for Marquette would be above them. Maybe. This is a matchup of 2 of the best point guards in the entire country. So that is, that individual matchup there is going to be fantastic. But when you look at how did Florida go to Auburn and do what no one else could do, and really, it wasn't even like oh man, well, Florida went and stole one. Not at all. Not at all. Outplayed Auburn. How did they do that without Elijah Martin? That front court was relentless. It was relentless. Alex Condon, 17-10. Tommy H, 16-9. Those two were just massive. Didn't even have Henlogden yet. So if you're asking yourself, can Florida go into Alabama here and win this thing? Almost certainly. That's why Alabama's probably not going to be like -4 like they normally would be at home against a good team. I think this thing's going to be right down the middle.
Well, and just think about the front court matchup here, right?
Yep.
I mean, just think about the guys you're sporting out on Alabama's side. You got Grant Nelson, you got Big Cliff, you got Mo D, you got Jaron Stevenson, and then you look on the other side. You're like, hey, those 4 guys right there, come on. And then you look over and you're like, well, there's Alex Condon, there's Tommy H, there's Chinyelu, there's Alexis, like, Logden's back. Come on now. Like, come on with these 2 front courts. Are you kidding me? It's like, whose game is this going to be? We always make that prediction.
Yeah.
Like, pick any of these guys. Like, any of those guys from that group of 8 or 9. It's going to be one of those guys' game here because as much as, like you said, you look at the player of the year type stuff with the point guards, you look at these front courts, and I think that's exactly what's going to decide this game because we always talk about Florida and the offensive rebounding ability, and we also talk about it from the standpoint of knowing that Alabama is going to drive. They're going to attack. They're going to try to get to the free throw line. And when you look at who they're trying to score against on the other side, top 10 two-point defense in the country, and now, again, having Logden back, you've got someone who can block shots. We know the defense that Tommy H can play and the sort of, bully ball that we've seen from Chinyelu at times. Like, there's so many fun matchups that you can kind of sport out here in the front court, and I think that's probably what winds up deciding this game because you just assume that the guards are going to get theirs in this game. But the front court, I think, is going to be so fun in this one.
And that's where not having a 6'8", 220 Darian Reed could really impact Alabama. You could use that body in a game like this, and you could use that length on the perimeter against those Florida guards as well. And I love this is gonna feel like a Final Four game, Blake. Like the tweets are gonna be flying when this game is going. Oh, this feels like an Elite Eight matchup. This feels like a Final Four matchup. Because when you look at the backcourt and the depth too, because that's what we always say about Florida, they come in waves. That depth is just so elite. It's not only the depth, but the quality of depth. Bringing in Denzel Aberdeen off the bench, Alabama's gonna bring in Aiden Holloway, one of the best shooters in the entire SEC. So this is quite literally like, how sometimes we're doing a preview and we're like, well, it's defense against offense. Something's got to give here. This is like high-flying offense with a ton of depth and physicality in the front court goes against the exact same thing. You might not have a better matchup than Florida against Alabama this year.
Well, and just as a note, I did mention Sam Alexis. Remember, we always do this before the injury reports come out. He's not played the past several games, but if you look at the timeline, I haven't seen anything, Max, that's ruled him out. But Todd Golden had said like it'd been a couple weeks. Well, I think now we're kind of at that 2-week mark. So like I don't know what to expect, whether he'll be available or not. But I did want to throw him in there as another one where it's like if you give Florida yet another number. I mean, he's not someone who's going to play probably 20 minutes in this game if he's out there. But you see the point is that the depth, I think, on both of these teams in the front court, that's what we're trying to sort of, look at here in terms of how this thing could play out. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think, again, we kind of look at it from, I'll say this, like from Florida's perspective too. And I guess we kind of say this about Alabama at home. Like we talked about Florida on the road. Like the Georgia game was just like, wait a minute, where did that come from? How do you get down 26 in the first half? Well, then we're like, okay, look at the Tennessee game, right? They only scored 44 points on the road against a shorthanded Tennessee team. Before that, you're looking at the South Carolina game, like, wait a minute, they probably should have lost that game. And so, yet they go on the road and beat Auburn, right? And then we're like Alabama at home. Well, Alabama at home's usually, come on, they're kind of invincible. Well, you had the Ole Miss game that happened, the Auburn game, really no shame in that, right? I mean, you lose at home to the number one team in the country, the clear number one team. And so something's got to give here. because it's like, Florida has won multiple big games on the road, but none bigger than Auburn. Alabama has had maybe a few more, slips at home than we're used to. But still, if you're talking strength on strength and what these two teams are capable of, that's why I think, like you said, I wouldn't be shocked at all if this is a pick 'em, because it does feel like one of those where, let's say Alabama's unbeaten at home. Well, you're going to lean in Alabama's favor here. Let's say Florida, didn't have a couple of those close calls on the road and then losing a game at Georgia. Well, maybe you favor the Gators a little bit in this matchup. So let's make picks, because this could be game of the year type potential between these two.
Yeah. When you look at the point distribution in SEC play, Alabama defensively, they have held opponents to the second least. So the rank says 15 on my screen, but second least amount of points from three-pointers. Only about 26% of their opponent points are from threes. However, they give up the most from two. Basically, what I'm trying to say is they run you off the three-point line, Alabama. Mm-hmm. They do a really good job at limiting volume three-point attempts. Florida offensively, number one in the league in points from three in terms of distribution. So you've got an Alabama defense at home who does a very, very good job at limiting three-point attempts, limiting clean looks, even in a high-paced game. So that funnels you into the inside where Florida is still plenty talented. Tommy H. and Alex Condon, I think you're going to have two big games from them offensively. And this is going to be just an incredible game. I'm going to go with the Gators. I'm going with the Gators. I don't like how Alabama's trapped in between the emotional letdown from the Meshack shot, in between trying to get up for the Auburn rematch. And I've done this multiple times before where Florida's been on the road and they've been a slight maybe underdog, and I've doubted them. And most times they come out and make me look like an idiot. I'm not doing it this time. I think the front court all together, Condon, Hanlockton, Rubin, Tommy H. It's just a machine we haven't seen. Give me the Gators.
Yeah, this is a tough one. And like I said, I think Florida's been one of those teams, especially last year. You look at the matchups, they just played really well against Alabama and seemed to figure out ways to exploit some of those defensive deficiencies at times last year. But Alabama's played better on that end of the floor, and I do wonder about Alabama, that slight hangover effect from losing the game at Tennessee the way they did. However, I'm going to pick the Tide in this one. Nice. Again, I think it's when in doubt, pick the home team. And I think these two teams, to me, are so close together that when in doubt, pick the home team. And but I may look back on this, and if Florida wins, be like, you know what? Again, there's just something about Florida, I feel like, recently against Alabama, in the golden era versus, Oats here. I think it's one that we'll see if the Gators can still put up those kind of offensive numbers they did last year, because they were pretty consistent in attacking Alabama. But we'll see if the difference is this year Alabama's just better defensively, and the battle of the front courts, I think, is how we're going to dub this one. But speaking of brackets, obviously the winner of this one will have a chance to take a big step forward. You can take a step forward into our friends at BracketBids. Enter into that free pick'em contest or start an auction draft league with friends, family, or coworkers. Everyone starts with the same bidding dollars. Up to you to outwit and outbid your league mates to secure the teams you think will go the distance. Choose from multiple scoring models, including upset bonuses, to reward the bold picks. Track your teams with live in-game scoring. Watch the standings shift in real time. The further your teams advance, the higher you climb the standings. For league play, use that promo code SC16 for 40% off. SC16, 40% off. Download the BracketBids app today or visit them at bracketbids.com. We appreciate you guys watching. As always, we'll have reaction to the games on Wednesday or Thursday morning. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. We appreciate you watching. We'll talk to you soon at Southeastern 16.